Hey everybody, how you doing? Today we're talking about the episode of Murder by Experts, The Dark Island. Murder by Experts was a show that was originally hosted by John Dixon Carr, the man who's considered the master of locked room mysteries. It was later hosted by Brett Halliday, but most of them were John Dixon. Generally, how the show works is they would be trying to, while some radio stations were trying to sell coffee or cigarettes, they were all selling ad space for something. This one was largely unsponsored, but they would try and advertise a new author's book that was coming out. That new author would come on. Well, they wouldn't even have him as a guest, really. They would just mention that author, their new book that was out at the time, and then say that that author picked a story for them to do on the show. In this case, the author that they had featured was William Ivory, who that's a pseudonym for the writer Cornell Goodrich. And Cornell Goodrich was a guy who wrote a lot of Jazz Age novels. He wrote actually 6 Jazz Age novels inspired by F. Scott Fitzgerald and The Great Gatsby kind of stuff about lavish parties and that sort of thing. But by the time he had his 7th novel coming, I Love You, Paris, the Great Depression had hit, and it was really hard for him to establish himself as a serious author. So he took his 7th manuscript that he could not find a publisher for, I Love You, Paris, threw it into the dustbin, and recreated himself as a pulp author. So he comes on to Murder by Experts, and the book that he had written at the time was The Blue Ribbon. And the story that he picked is called The Dark Island by Sidney Morris. And this is where this show gets a little confusing for me, because the author always picks a story, but anytime that I've tried to go and look up that story and who wrote it, that just seems to be a dead end. And I mean, a lot of these authors, in this case, William Ivory or Cornell Woodritch, a lot of his books are out of print anyways. So, I mean, it very well could be that, these are short stories that were only printed in, a detective magazine or something like that at the time. And there's just not much known about them. But it almost seems to me like they had writers for the show and they had a set of stories written, and then they had each author I don't even know if they let them pick, because the authors aren't even interviewed on the show. It's like such a shoehorned afterthought that these writers are included. But let's get to the episode, because that's what I really want to talk to you about. Okay, so The Dark Island, written by Sidney Morris, who, again, I can't find anything about, is about an island off the coast of Maine. And on this dark island that's uninhabited by, or largely uninhabited, except for one woman that can be seen walking sometimes in the mist and fog by herself. A man goes out there and he's trying to see if he can potentially rent out the cabin or the cottage on the island, because he's writing a book and he'd like some solitude. She lets him know that the cabin is not for her, to be rented out. She lives there, and her father lived there before, and he was also a writer. We find out that her father was actually a famous criminologist and wrote multiple books on criminology. And the man trying to rent the cottage from her now is also a budding criminologist who is trying to write a new book. She ends up letting him stay with him, and they form a bit of an affair. He's also talking to her about on the mainland, there is a scalpel killer. So there's a serial killer running around, and no one knows who it is. They haven't been caught. And as the story goes on, she begins to suspect that as her new romantic partner and this new guest at the cottage, he starts going on business trips. She starts to believe that he is potentially the killer. And coming back, he lets her know that in reviewing her father's notes, that she actually has been the killer all along, sleepwalking in her sleep, attacking people, and he's witnessed it. However, the way that this plans out is that we don't know if he actually is the killer, if he's gaslighting her. She does not believe she is. She has no recollection of any of this. So it comes down to a showdown, and then there is still the fallout of seeing who comes away from that alive and who actually was responsible for these murders throughout the episode. It's a pretty awesome story. It's got a great twist ending, as a lot of Murder by Experts episodes do. So check it out. Murder by Experts, The Dark Island.